Hello, boys and girls. Lord Hawkeye here again. It has come to my attention that many people, grossly ignorant of contract law, still support the idea of a social contract and believe it's a legal, enforceable, and fair contract. This just cannot go on, and since its supporters want to throw morals out the window and try and claim the law is on their side, I'm going to discuss several of the legal problems with the idea of a social contract for you. Duress. Contract law clearly states that any exchange made under duress is not legal. This is why if I point a gun at you and demand your wallet, I cannot argue in court that you legally surrendered it to me, because you were under duress at the time. For a contract to be legal, all parties must be able to refuse without any threat of ill consequence whatsoever. Proponents of the social contract like to argue that you can freely refuse by simply leaving the country, but this doesn't work. The truth is, you in fact are threatening to force people from their homes unless they agree to your terms, and jail them if they refuse to do either. This is a blatant example of duress, and thus invalidates the social contract. Some attempt to get around this by comparing the social contract to a landlord evicting tenants for non-payment of rent or other reasons. But since the government is not the owner of the land, this comparison does not work either. Not to mention, the landlord does have proof of a prior agreement to pay rent and follow his terms. The government has no such evidence. The mere fact of being born does not work. Pointing to my house and saying mine just simply does not make it so. In short, in contract law, no means no. You cannot set unreasonable hurdles for non-consent, and demanding that someone leave the country is definitely under the category of unreasonable. Tacit consent. Imagine if you receive junk mail that claims to have signed you up for a magazine subscription and will begin billing you for it, and if you don't want it, you need only reply back saying so. Would you consider this a fair agreement? Probably not. What if you were away from home? What if the notice didn't get to you? What if you were unable to reply for whatever reason? Well, once upon a time, some companies did try to do this very thing, and it was soundly rejected in court for these very reasons. Tacit consent is when you merely assume acceptance of a contract without any prior agreement, and it is rejected by contract law. Some try to claim that tacit consent is legal and point to things such as auto insurance that automatically renews every month unless you state otherwise. This is something very different. It is known as estoppel. It only applies when there is prior agreement to such an arrangement. You made a conscious choice to apply for auto insurance, and you consciously agreed to have it renew automatically every month. It was not simply assumed that you agreed. If an auto insurance simply insured you with no proof of your consent, they would have no legal stand to demand any money from you. In short, if there is no proof of a conscious decision to agree to a contract before any exchange was made, then there is no contract. If a man can force his will on someone and ex post facto call it a contract, then legally one could get away with just about anything by simply calling it a contract afterwards. Once again, no means no. Arguing that it means yes does not make it so. Unconscionability and undue influence. Imagine if we engaged in a business deal and I demanded to also be the arbiter should either party not make good on their end. Would you consider this to be a reasonable request? Probably not. While I would have every reason in the world to prosecute you if you did not pay your end, I have no such incentive to prosecute myself. In fact, I have nothing to lose and everything to gain by cheating and exploiting you, because all the power of arbitration is in my hands. Yet, Sorry, needed water. Yet, people defend this very scenario with this so-called social contract. We're supposed to pay taxes and the government is supposed to use them for the services we require of it. Yet, the government is also the arbiter, creating a massive conflict of interests. The result is, people who don't pay taxes are acted against very harshly, yet politicians who blow tax money on pork spending very rarely face any negative repercussions. Vote them out? What's that going to do? They're not made to pay back what they squandered, and in fact, they get rewarded with gold-plated pensions and complete immunity from any ill consequences for their dishonesty. Does anybody see Bill Clinton in jail for raiding the Social Security Fund? I don't think so. Is Tony Blair having his wages garnished to pay back the absurd bailouts he gave to his corporate buddies? Can't say I've heard of any such thing. Like the above example, politicians have nothing to lose and everything to gain by blowing tax dollars on whatever they want, and they face no threat of retribution whatsoever. Thus, the social contract is massively unfair, with one side having all the power and vastly more ability to negotiate than the other, in addition to being shielded from any consequence for non-compliance. No court would ever accept a private contract that was so obviously one-sided. Frustration of purpose. In contract law, frustration of purpose refers to when the original intention for the contract can no longer be fulfilled. For example, if you plan to rent a house from me, the contract was signed, but then the house burned down before you could move in, do you still owe me rent? Obviously not, because my end of the bargain cannot be fulfilled, and thus you are perfectly free to get out of the agreement. This is an issue that the social contract proponents like to dance around. They will bleat endlessly about our end of the bargain, but what is the state's, I wonder? Well, according to the Declaration of Independence, it is to secure people's rights and freedoms. So if a government is deliberately attempting to undermine its people's freedoms, then a frustration of purpose is clearly evident. Not to mention, it is also a well-known fact that everyone who works for the state swears an oath to the Constitution. So if the state repeatedly and with contempt breaks this oath, do we still owe them our end of the deal? I really don't see why. What kind of a contract allows one side to break it but not the other? So what's the moral of all this? Some might be saying, but Hawkeye, I thought you didn't believe in laws. That's correct. I don't. The point of all this is, as always, the matter of integrity. The state supposedly is justified by this social contract, yet as any quick read through the social contract law will tell you, the state itself does not consider such an arrangement to be legal at all. So the moral is, if the state itself doesn't think the social contract is a legitimate argument for its power, why should I? Or anyone for that matter? Think about it. Until next time, be aware and be wise.